Happy Friday, Dean.
Hey,
Good to
what's
have
up?
you on here, man. Guys, you don't usually get Dean on a Friday hotcakes, but two things. My team apparently they just booked meetings like crazy today, which I can't be mad at them for because I mean they're doing business, which is a good thing. But the other component of that is that I was like, oh, I found this really cool article and issue that's going on in the cybersecurity world, and I was like, I want to talk about this, but they weren't available. So I asked Dean last second. If you don't know Dean, I'm going to let him introduce himself, but at the same time, he is basically Dr. Zoidberg, if I remember correctly. Not really sure the story of that, but I feel like you've told me once, but I don't remember.
Yeah, so how's it going? I'm Dean. I've been in this space for a hot minute. I was MSP, operations and service manager for quite a long time. That's where Dr. Zoidberg came from because I said mean things about operations online and I didn't want to say it with my face.
Of
Uh,
course.
and then I switched to the dark side, and now I'm a vendor shill, and I work for Helped currently. They are a fantastic 100% US based white label outsourcing firm, and it dovetails really nicely into today's topic.
It does. One of the things I love that you just said, Dean, specifically that you used to kind of go under the persona of Dr. Zoidberg and basically just trash things. And now on Fridays, you have a nice little moving sign behind you that says Friendship Fridays. Like, just a happy day. Friday's a happy day for Dean. Monday, not so much, but Friday, happy days.
You start a Monday off with a punch in the face, and then a Friday you give somebody a nice hug.
Yeah, that's good. Can you kind of I'm not really one for trends. I actually tend to buck trends. So like I don't know if you've seen, but typically people take airplane selfies when they go to conferences. I've gotten
Yep.
into the habit of just photoshopping myself on top of airplanes because I just don't do trends typically. Um but this one's interesting because a lot of people have kind of jumped on. How did Spicy Monday, Friendship Friday become a thing?
Yeah. Oh, good question. So, and actually, the same concept as Dr. Zoidberg previously. So, most of us in any space, even if we're confident, are generally uncomfortable representing our true thoughts outwardly. And short of being given explicit permission to do that, it's just a human thing that we tend to want to stay with the herd, whatever the herd is doing. If the herd is being relatively quiet, well, we also want to be quiet. If you give someone an intermediary, whether that's a literal mask, like a DJ, like Dead Mouse that wears a mask over their face, a hashtag, or in my case, a cartoon character, well, now it's that intermediary that is speaking up and having confidence, not me. And that's a really good psychological enabler for a lot of people to just get out more and talk more and share their thoughts. So Spicy Monday started as, well, I already say things that I think need to be said, and I don't care too much about the consequences, but I recognize lots of people have opinions and they might. So let's create a hashtag as a little bit of a safe zone where if you did want to post something that, Will Brooks wouldn't say, but Spicy Monday Will Brooks would say, well, it's the hashtag's fault, not Will's fault.
I
That's
feel
kind of how
like
it started.
Spicy Monday Will Brooks is just like a slightly grumpier version of Will Brooks, which really isn't that grumpy to begin with. I don't know. It's my spiciness is usually no, I can get pretty spicy, especially when it comes down to seeing insurance and cybersecurity interacting with each other. It can get a little frustrating sometimes. So I dig that. I really like the I want to say the juxtaposition, lose a big word, the juxtaposition of the two though, because you got Spicy Monday. It's like, hey, let's just like really identify some things early on in the week that maybe we could try to work on this week. Honestly, I look at it that way as you could look at it as, oh, Dean's attacking me again because that sounds like me, or you look at it and say, okay, what could be I mean, I'm a preacher, right? So on Sunday mornings, one of the things I always used to try and take away was, okay, when I heard a sermon on Sunday morning, how do I let that influence the way I live
Yes.
through the course of the week? And it's kind of like that with Spicy Monday. Okay, if I'm running my business a certain way and I interact with something that's a little, oh, I hear this thing, it kind of feels like a punch in the gut a little bit, but resonates. Okay, how do I work to be better throughout the course of the week to address that? Right. And then Friday rolls around, and all of a sudden you get, the warm fuzzy Fridays um of shout outs and what people are doing well and what you're seeing. So it kind of helps going into the weekend. start off on a good note, but unfortunately, not everybody feels the warm fuzzies of a Friendship Friday, and that's what I want to talk about today, Dean.
Yes.
And so thanks for coming on literally last minute. I texted Dean this morning. I actually texted Kyle Christensen last night, and I said, "Hey, what's Dean's phone number? Because I cannot find it, even though I've texted you a million times." You know what I've realized is, and this is total tangent, and this is one of the problems with me being a host on anything, is I can't stay focused for more than 30 seconds. Is you know how you can add different accounts to your phone, so it's like, oh, all of my contacts associated with this email, and then all of my contacts associated with this email. Well, I was lazy because I got a new phone, and I only associated one of my emails and the contacts from that. So I'm guessing yours is lumped in with the other one, along with probably a lot of other important people I work with that I've probably added as contacts over the past year. So it made me think I probably should get around to re-adding that one.
So we're just not friends anymore, and this is your
yeah.
I understand.
Mainly because I don't have you saved as, actually you are saved as a contact now, and when I restore that other one, it's probably going to yell at me for having duplicates, but that's okay. Two Deans are better than one Dean, I think. But
no, you'll get sick of that real quick.
The terrible idea. Yeah. But Dean, I like your shirt, I like your hat, I like your beard.
Thank you.
We're good. It's a good look. So yeah, what I want to talk about today, and like I said, I brought Dean in last second here. So hey, let's talk about this thing. And before I bring up the article itself, let's just talk a little bit about disgruntled employees. Disgruntled. Would it be disgruntled ex-employees or it'd be disgruntled ex-employees, because ex-disgruntled would mean they're gruntled now, right?
Yes.
So one of the things I talk about with MSPs a lot, because I don't think cyber insurance specifically is asking about this enough, is if you let someone go from your company, what are you doing to limit their access, aka completely eliminate their access to your network? I think that might be something. Do you see that overlooked? People being let go and they still have network credentials and whatnot.
So we see that being overlooked. I've had the benefit through our incredibly fortunate, my former MSP, to have hired and had hundreds of help desk employees. And while I'd like to think all of them thought I was the best manager ever, some of them have been disgruntled. But if you take a step back from that and don't apply malice at all, how about just people who leave the company, whether they're gruntled or disgruntled? Sure. What do you do to make sure that they are not in a possession, even if it's totally by accident, to cause harm to your business or your clients? And what I see frequently, even at more like medium to high maturity MSPs, they have an offboarding process, and they very likely do have like single sign-on and can lock someone out of all of that material relatively quickly. But almost every MSP has something that's common cross-client, hopefully no longer local admin passwords, but there's usually enough commonality cross-client that if you've worked there for a while, at least in here, there's probably a fair amount an employee who's left is able to retain that could allow them to do something harmful, whether that was their intent or not. And once it becomes their intent, and then you realize like, wow, somebody is actively trying to be malicious, I don't think a lot of folks sit down and think about locking them out of stuff isn't all that's necessary. It's really more of almost a DLP conversation. What are you doing to make sure that privileged information that employee had access to, all the intimate details they know about that client that they were supporting, well, they still know those details. Like, fine, my passwords are gone. I still know that like Susan in accounting has a dog and is a scatterbrain. So let me just do some social engineering. And she probably doesn't know I'm gone. And now suddenly I have her credentials. And now what can I do with that? And,
that was my thought, right? Is let's put aside disgruntled, like you said, and just talk about ex-employees in general. Let's say I just leave the company because I get another job elsewhere, and you keep my Outlook email address functional and it's working, right? And something happens where a threat actor gets a hold of my credentials, gets in there, and now we have a BEC issue on our hands where that threat actor is sending out emails from me, who no longer works at the company, to a bunch of, in our case, MSP partners who we work with, who hopefully they'll notice it's fake, but at the same time, who knows? And you could potentially have something that really blows up on your hands. So I agree. I was actually talking, I don't know if you know Tara Wheeler from Red Queen Dynamics,
I
but
do, yeah, yeah.
okay, so I was talking to Tara this week, her and her team, and their product's really cool. I mean, it really involves asking questions to the end client just to get a good, like, bulk massive amounts of questions to the end client to get an understanding of security things that maybe the MSP wouldn't necessarily be driving, especially in the compliance space. There are things that aren't necessarily security focused, right? So it helps build out a greater network and or net web of understanding. But one of the things I asked and I thought was interesting is, like, what are MSPs doing to ensure that if a client leaves a company, or not, sorry, client, if an employee leaves a company, that's getting updated? Like, what are the processes and procedures in place to say so and so has is no longer with the company, and therefore we must do this, and this, right? Because to your point, if credentials are left out there, even if it's not malicious from the ex employee's perspective, you still have an endpoint for the an endpoint for the threat actor to get in, and that's, in my mind, that's, and it's one that's being even less monitored from a daily user standpoint, right? I mean, I'm going in every day to my Outlook email, and I'll change the password every once in a while. I have MFA all set up, all that good stuff. But at the same time, if it's completely inactive, what are we doing to make sure it gets removed,
It it's tough because even at MSPs that have some of the hand wavy answers to that, like, like single sign on and offboarding checklist, and they're following it. Well, with any process or any control, humans still have to execute it, and humans drift. There's always a delta from what good looks like eventually to what happens in practice. So I think one of the simplest things, and it's not a security answer, it's an operations answer, is simply having an auditing process for your employee offboarding process.
Yep.
Someone else, not the person executing the offboarding, is going through and auditing that quality, and periodically as a company going through and let's say you do, like, you're like a least privilege access philosophy company, which once again is a pretty high maturity marker. But
Sure,
let's say
yeah.
you're even doing that. I think just even on a quarterly basis, getting together as individual departments in your MSP and then as a company and making a list of every conceivable anything an individual employee might have access to, and whether that's part of single sign-on or not, that then becomes part of the auditing process. And I can give you a really good example. So, like, I left my MSP is pretty good, and they have my former MSP has a pretty good offboarding process that I helped build, and pretty good security controls, and they have their act together. Like, I would trust
Sure,
them.
yeah.
The other day, I needed a document from ConnectWise University, and of course, helped as a ConnectWise, user, so I couldn't get into that. And I was like, I wonder if my old credentials from our first MSP, when we rolled up in the acquisition from ThinkTech, wonder if those work. Boop, right in. I never deleted the MFA off Google Auth, so I was able to get in. And I needed a document about, like, email connector tagging, but I was able to get into that way. And that's a great example of, I guarantee you that I was removed from, ConnectWise. I was removed from all the most obvious places, but that wasn't on the checklist to go back and make sure I was removed from university access.
Yeah, and
And
you run into oh, sorry, finish your story first.
I was going to say, that's how easy that happens. Like, it
Yep.
doesn't have to start off as something insidious. It doesn't have to be a big gaping wound. It can be something incredibly benign. Because what could I do now that I have access to their large platforms university? Well, I might be able to convince a support agent at ConnectWise that I'm still an employee and exist, and that I should have a little bit more access, and there was an oversight and a mistake, especially if my former title was fairly high, high ranking in the company. Right there, I have a launch pad to start getting creative.
Yeah. No, dude, that's it. I mean, this is not even taking into account really poor account management, where you think of how, some of these small businesses have maybe one login for everything. So everybody uses the same email and password to log into accounts and stuff. So, and then you save that in a password manager. And then now I'm working at a company 5 years from now, but I'm like, oh, you know what? I really need access to this thing. And I used to be able to access it through my old employee. Let me just plug that in, and it works, and you're in. And it's like, I mean, it's the kind of thing where obviously login hygiene, having accounts that are per user, but or we do have point in time access, whatever it is your approach is. Definitely making sure that you're doing what you can when an employee leaves a company to make sure that they don't still have access, not because they're necessarily going to do anything malicious, but things can happen, right? And
Exactly.
that's kind of, now I do want to talk about on this Friendship Friday an actual malicious story, because I find it really interesting
It
anytime
is.
Disney and cybersecurity end up in the news together. So I'm going to share this, bring this up. So, a fired Disney World manager accused of dangerous menu hacking revenge plot. Oh man, gotta love clickbait titles. Also, the name of this website is Boing Boing, which I had never actually looked at before, but
That's
I
like
love
the
the
only
name.
website I visit. I have you never heard of it before?
I don't know, but also I use Instapaper. I don't know if you ever heard of Instapaper
No.
before, but one of the things I love about it is, like, if you're reading an article, you're like, "Hey, I want to go back to this later." You just literally save it to your Instapaper app. I've been using this since like 2012. Um, Honestly, it's not as necessary anymore because you have so many. But what's really funny is it removes all like the sidebar ads and stuff. But then when you go down here, "Hey, Happy Mutant, try the life changing magic of Boing Boing without ads." Sorry, I already beat you past that one. Anyway, so this is classic, a Florida man. Let's just start there, right? That's how you got
Florida
to start an
man,
article every
Florida
time.
man.
But a Florida man is facing federal computer fraud charges after allegedly launching cyber attacks against his former employer, Disney World, that included hacking into restaurant menus to change allergen information in ways that could have endangered public health. I mean, this is like really disgruntled. Does it even? I mean, he's literally saying, "I'm going to change." I think it says further down in the article. I'm not going to. Oh, yeah, here we go. Including falsely marking items as safe for those with peanut allergies, when in fact they could be deadly. Like, this dude's trying to kill people through the
Yeah, it
cyber attack.
definitely dips into a territory beyond like just pranking your old employer by putting like anime on the restaurant menus. Like
This is
that's
rough.
absolutely malice. Yeah.
Yeah, this is malicious, and this is like further than just trying to do some like social engineering to steal some money from the company. I mean, this is like,
Yeah.
this guy could get in some serious deep water. I mean, probably already is. I think he's been arrested at this point. Um, yeah, definitely. So I just saw this. I thought it was wild. So he also allegedly manipulated fonts to render menus unusable and redirected QR codes. So what do they call it? Quishing nowadays,
Yeah.
to unrelated websites. And the company estimates damages of at least 150,000. So you're like, okay, this dude's trying to kill people. Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he's trying to make Disney kill people, is what he'll probably say. Um, he's redirecting QR codes on menus. He's rendering menu websites unusable. Like, I don't even know your your take here. It doesn't sound to me like he is necessarily using old credentials to get in there, as much as it just like this dude actually, maybe he was, though. I'm not.
So I'm not a security professional, but the little bit I know about the internet and technology is that a
Yeah,
lot of these commercially designed, you think about this like our MSP tools as well, a lot of enterprise focused tools that are designed to allow a business to render service or support usually have multiple methods that they can be accessed or interfaced with to make them
right.
convenient to the business. And we have the same thing, like things that integrate with multiple stuff. And like menu boards are notorious, so just like billboards, road sign boards are notorious for being relatively easy to gain access to because there tend to be manufacturer service methods that are documented or leaked. So I think one of the things right there is it's entirely possible this was a SolarWinds password 123 type of situation where this person was able, due to their old role, because they were the director of this technology, that they were able to just know that like this particular brand of product has this particular type of maintenance backdoor basically that I can leverage. That's possible. It is possible they still had access to things. They might have had a unauthorized jump box they had installed to make their life easier to support, these things. There's so many things there that could be the risk that, like, in my mind, closing all that up's important, but in my mind, the single biggest way to reduce the risk here is to figure out how did we get somebody with that much malice and hate in their heart to become a part of our organization, and then
Yeah,
what in our organization led them to a point where they really felt this was their only recourse when they left.
It's wild, man. It's and what happened? Yeah, what happened in terms of the termination that would lead them to go so much further than just, all right, you know, I'm mad at my employer, so I'm gonna. He could have stopped at, we're gonna send the QR codes off to episodes of Dragon Ball Z, and we're going to make it so the
I
menu.
mean, the fonts rendered in like, so the menu isn't readable. That's kind of amusing. Like if that was it, like haha, like you still gonna get a big fine and go to jail because you can't do that. But like,
right.
But think about that. Like when we were all kids, like there was something that you might be tempted to do because it was in like the overlapping Venn diagram, that region of like kind of funny but not dangerous. But once you do that and you don't necessarily get a repercussion, like maybe you run up and touch somebody's front door, and that's pretty safe. It emboldens you to want to move to the next step, which is maybe ringing the doorbell and running away, which also might be safe. But some people are going to keep that going. And then before long, you have, you know, the flaming bag on the doorstep, which is kind of not nice, and destruction of property. So things can escalate that way. You know, this person may not have started out with an intention to hurt people, but once you realize how easy it is to do one thing, especially if no one really notices and you want more attention for it, that's a dopamine hit. And I think a lot of what you can do as a service organization to reduce that is look internally at how you're recruiting, hiring, and then your internal culture and the way you treat employees is.
Yeah.
Are you putting people in a situation where this is going to feel like their only outcome, no matter what the reason was for termination?
Yeah. You know, I really think it's interesting. Before we dig into like reasoning and motive and all that kind of stuff, I did some quick research here. So Dean, you sent this over to me this morning. This is the actual criminal case filed against the guy. And they have this chart here. So first of all, the chart is meant to have blah, 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 blah. So the laptop image on the far left is not specifically referencing a laptop, but rather a client device. The Shure, the bad guy, returned his company a laptop, and it is therefore believed that he used a personal computer to conduct the attack. So you're like, okay, well, there's the first piece, right? He used a personal computer to get in. Obviously used VPNs here. That's these little clouds, or I don't know if you can read it or not, but he used VPNs to gain access, or not gain access, to hide, to mask his IP address and hide where he was. But then it gets crazy. So if you scroll down a little further here we go. So they were using an application called Menu Creator. So probably pretty easy to get in and edit. You know, it's probably like Canva for menus, honestly. And has probably like tools to create QR codes and whatever. So it says here that it was later identified that he utilized an administrator account for Menu Creator to create a new use. So he had access to an admin account, is effectively what we got here. Is he had administrative access post-employment to get in and use an IP, used a VPN to mask where he was coming from and who he was, but used an admin account to create a new user under the name Emily Beeman, EPB, described for the user agent string, which is common logging field use, blah, 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 blah. They were using Menu Creator from a personal computer running Chrome. So they were able to learn all this stuff, but at the same time, what I think is really fascinating is that component. And that's really what I wanted to make sure we dig into is, why do your ex-employees still have administrative access? Like, I don't care if you're good or bad, if you're disgruntled or you're in a fine place. I don't care if you were hurt or if you're healthy. Why, if you leave a company, do you still have administrative rights? Like, and this is Disney.
Let's ask that in a different question. So let's say, take all the digital stuff out of it, physical security. So let's say you work at a company that issues you a company vehicle, and a vehicle you take home. And over the course of having that vehicle, you get an extra key made for completely legitimate reasons because you need more than one key to it. And eventually you part ways with the company. You return the vehicle, you return the key they issued you. They revoke your access into the building. So the main systems they care about, access in and out of their facility, revoked.
Right.
Are they aware that you copied the key to the vehicle, and are they really going to make any effort to recover it? Because I mean, that's not the main door. All right, fine, maybe the guy comes back later and pops the door on the company van and takes some network cable, whatever, we'll write it off. And so I think that happens a lot, where systems that not everyone in the company uses or doesn't have immediate awareness around sometimes get hand waved away, especially if controlling access to them isn't super easy. And I bet whatever this vendor program is probably didn't integrate with their SSO, probably needed somebody separately to go in and administer it. And if this guy was the only administrator of that program, and I think his title was like a directorship level thing, who's going to even think of that? So if we go back to that physical example, if I'm the fleet manager for that physical company and I leave where that had been my job, well, somebody going to go looking around for my SOP on how to recover and secure all the fleet vehicles? Or they're just going to assume it's being done? And that's probably what happened in a case like this. And I think the lesson is that like you're only really secure as your least secured anything.
Yeah.
And if someone's a stakeholder of a process or a major area of your service delivery, that knowledge can't live only in their head. Like operationally, you should have a hit by a bus strategy, but security wise, you should too. Someone else at Disney's IT department should have known that application, the administrative process, who the administrators were, how to add or remove users, and hopefully if they're performing an audit, that would be caught. And assuming this employee wasn't maliciously obfuscating that process while he was an employee, which I'm going to assume at least for a while he wasn't. But that's how easy it happens, you know, with oh yeah, whatever, you know, we have 2FA on our you know, restaurant menu management website from that vendor. Like it's good enough. Who's going to use a restaurant menu to hurt us? Like that's, you know, exactly how it happens.
But then you think, you know, you brought this up before I got into all the nerdy stuff of what actually happened, because I'm very curious about this whole thing. But what would cause what would cause someone to be this angry at the company? And if he got fired, he was let go from Disney, did something really bad happen that led to his termination? I don't know all these details, right? And it might be in the actual, I haven't read through the whole criminal complaint yet. It might actually be in there. But then that brings to, you know, if something was, and this is something just to keep in mind for any employer that's listening, if something leads to a termination of an employee, especially something that's like really bad, but also it could just be anything. If you have to fire someone, you should immediately think to myself, okay, immediately upon firing, or even, yeah, I mean, even day of, before you even have that conversation, call IT, say, hey, at X time today, I'm letting this employee go. I mean, I think it's really important. It's the kind of thing where when we talk from a network perspective, people don't still tend, a lot of business owners I talk to, they still tend not to realize that like literally all of your business is being done online. I mean, think of this situation. You know, back in the day, you'd go to a restaurant, they'd hand you a menu. Maybe the only internet related stuff that happened was when you gave them your credit card to pay for your food. Everything else was done on paper. Even you signed the bill, you ordered from a paper menu, you walked it, all that kind of stuff. Now you can reserve a table online through a reservation platform. You get there, they have an iPad where they pick your table, they say exactly where you go. You sit down, they give you a QR code in this case to scan for a menu. When you're done eating, they don't even give you a physical bill. They come around with a scanner that you could literally, you know, Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever. I'll say Samsung Pay for the 3 people out there using Galaxies. And give you the opportunity, like everything's digital except the food you eat. So we're almost at this point now where people don't really realize that almost the entirety of their business is done online. Like COVID should have opened that up, I think, to a lot of people's understanding. Even though you may have a physical location where you work, you're able to work not at that physical location. That should tell you something. So if you're going to let someone go, you definitely want to make sure you're revoking those accounts, both in case something crazy like this happens, or to what we were saying before, where something could go on. Now, this guy, things get pretty crazy. I'm gonna bring the article back up because honestly, it's crazy. Like, you know, we talk about disgruntled employees sometimes. or just ex-employees, administrative accounts, removing account access, all that kind of stuff. But this gets kind of next level. So the situation escalated. Can we see this? When he was spotted, I can't pronounce, is it Shure? I'm gonna say Shure. Shure was spotted on a Ring doorbell camera outside one targeted employee's home late at night on October 22nd. As a result of the actions of Shure, the victim left his residence and is currently staying at a hotel. So this guy literally was like going to people's houses who he worked with. Like, you brought it up before, right? This is not just a cyber attack where you're like trolling the company. This guy has some hurt in his heart, malice in his heart, and I don't really know what. I've been playing a lot of Kingdom Hearts, so I know about like hearts and no hearts and nobodies and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if anybody listening knows what the heck I'm talking about, but it is Disney related, so we'll just throw that out there. But anyway,
Yeah.
This guy definitely went through something, or is going through something, that would cause this total breakdown of and they said, and I'll go back a little bit, after a search warrant was executed at his home, I don't know, in September, he denied wrongdoing and claimed the company was attempting to frame him, which, great, I would probably say the same thing. However, investigators found evidence linking him to the attacks, including a docs folder containing personal information about company employees that he targeted. So he's looking to take people down for whatever reason. I don't know all the details there, but this is just, I know this seems extreme, Dean, but I feel like it's a little bit of a wake up call to people, just to say, hey, you don't know what your employees are necessarily going through.
The way it manifested is extreme, but I
Yeah.
actually think it's really common. So like, here, I have a question for you. Have you ever directly, either yourself or someone you know personally, have they ever told you that they've had a quote crazy ex?
Yeah.
Yes. And if we assume, let's say 50% of the people that have told us that are exaggerating and wave it away, that's still a large percentage of people that have had an experience, a relationship with another human, where they felt that that human was behaving in a manner that was irrational or not in alignment with the values they had both agreed to.
Yeah.
And I think that that's is
good.
far more common. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we use the, in that case, crazy, the word, derived from being mentally unstable. Person doesn't have to actually be mentally unstable for them to have a value mismatch with you. And the challenge that you run into, especially with employees in the interview process, as humans, most of us are pretty decent at masking that value mismatch if we have an agenda. It's a survival skill. So you have to start figuring out, what are the patterns of behavior they displayed previous to working for me? What are the patterns of behavior they're displaying during the interview? And what are the patterns of behavior they're displaying in their first 90 days at my company? And does all of that consistently align with the values that our two organizations have agreed to in our relationship? And if they don't, if there's little subtle things that don't align, that not always, but usually, that is an indicator that someone was masking that value statement initially, and there probably will be a problem.
I liked what you said, Dean. That was like a mic drop moment, or maybe not a mic drop moment, like a revelation moment, right? Where you're like, hey, a relationship, whether it's work, whether it's personal, it involves, I like to use the word covenant a lot, in the way of like, hey, you're forming a relationship with another person, and there are agreements that happen. I don't like to say contract, because that makes it sound formal. I guess with business there is that. So you get a contract, covenant, relationship, whatever, but there are kind of parameters that are established to say, hey, we're going to behave in a certain way. You see this with abusive relationships all the time. And in abuse, they are definitely not behaving the way that has been established by the parameters of the relationship. But so often it's hard for the person, the abusee, to separate themselves from that relationship. And
Very
it's really sad.
hard.
But in this case, right, in a working environment, you have a person an employee who, when hired, agreed to certain terms of how they would behave. If they got let go because they weren't adhering to those, especially, I mean, ideally you provide feedback, you have conversations. It's not just an immediate, all right, you're out of here. You have conversations to try and correct course, like a spicy Monday talk or something. But you try to get them to go in a different direction. If they don't, then there should be that understanding that, hey, like, this probably just isn't the right fit, and that should be okay. But when you have the next level, now you have the crazy X, or the crazy X employee, or whatever the situation is, really what that leads to is you've got a person who isn't behaving in the way that you both agreed to, but you're taking it to a next level now, where it's saying the person who is not behaving in the way you both agreed to, is actually behaving in a way that is extremely different than what I had planned on. Like to the point where myself or my fellow employees or my family members or whatever feel not safe. And that's a problem, right? So I think you can get to that point too, but it paints a picture here that I think is important for all of us to kind of walk away with, that you don't, and I kind of said this before you went on this, you don't necessarily even know what's going on in someone's life. And so it's not to fear fact to do like a fear factor kind of thing, or to spread fear for employers on who they might be hiring or whatnot, but it's just to create good practices that kind of build a fence around every employee and say, okay, if an employee gets let go, let's have policies and procedures in place to prevent future access to our networks, because we don't really know what's
Yes.
going on. You don't really know. You don't know if they're in a good place. You don't know if they're in a bad place. Maybe they got let go because they were fired. Maybe they left the company and got another job somewhere. But then something goes terribly wrong in their life, and they decide to just take it out on an ex-employer for some reason. Like, you don't know what could happen.
You
Um,
don't.
and you know what? Honestly, 90% of the time, nothing bad's going to happen from a disgruntled perspective, but you don't know who the 10% are. And so, in my mind, create those policies and procedures and do what you need to do to protect your business and your company in the
I think there's
process.
there's some additional stuff too that applies specifically to MSPs. So like
Sure.
in enterprise IT, like at Disney, this person probably wasn't directly customer facing.
Right.
And so there's positives and negatives in this scenario. So being customer facing automatically means the people consuming your product are humanized to you. And had he been customer facing, there is a greater psychological chance that the damage to random strangers would be more palpable, more of a palpable value statement in his head than the faceless customers of Disney with peanut allergies eating something that could kill them. But the downside to that at our MSP is that employees that perhaps are not incentivized or lose their incentive to sort of be excellent on behalf of the company in all things, that's very visible to the people that we're providing service to. And so I think if you're a service provider, you have to do the same thing we do with, judges and doctors and cops. We hold them to a higher standard. In
Right.
that relationship, the MSP or the service provider has to hold itself to a higher standard than it holds the employee in terms of uh, enforcing and really making good on its end of that covenant or that value statement.
Yep.
Let's assume for a minute that this guy, his actions clearly show that he's not a wonderful person, but let's pretend that didn't happen and let's treat him
Right.
like a victim for a minute. Let's say in his mind, he did everything he was supposed to do every day, and the company deviated from what they had agreed to and pushed him to start feeling that he was actually the abusee. I think that's a far more common trigger, whether that's a rational thought process or not, in a lot of organizations, and especially in service, where all we do is absorb pain. That's
Yeah.
all we do in service. No one calls us to say, hey, my printer's working great. Thank you so much. It's always pain. Your employees are already in a very mentally taxed, exhausted, frame all the time, very, very much ready to be fight or flight. And if mom and dad MSP, they're sort of the mother hen of that flock, is
Yeah.
not always perceived to be acting in those employees' best interests, combined with that stress and anxiety, you can start to have an otherwise good, high performing employee drift from those company values, from that covenant, to a
Yeah.
place where they may become incredibly disgruntled. They may start feeling malice and anger towards their coworkers or their staff when they didn't start that way.
What are we doing encourage our MSP employees who are being hit with consistent, I like what you said, consistent pain. I mean, it really is, hey, this isn't working. I'm not going to call my MSP and say, hey, good job setting up MFA today. I'm so happy that I have this code. It's usually going to be, hey, the MFA code's not working. I can't figure this out, right? You're getting, even if it's something really simple, it's still a negative. So, I mean, one thing I can say from an encouragement standpoint, one of the things I really appreciate about where I work is the higher ups, man, when you're doing a good job, even if it's something so minor, they let you know that you're doing a good job. Like, they just that you're appreciated, that your work is seen. and that even if it is uh, honestly kind of a minimal task. Hey, I created this thing in ClickUp and it was very easy to do. It's like, hey, thanks for doing that. That's really helpful for all of us. It's like something as minor as that, which also encourages you to kind of keep going. Here's the thing: when you look at it as negatives, right? When you see a client reach out to you and say, "I hate this new system. It's not working. I'm so frustrated. I don't know how to use computers." Right? It can feel like a pain point.
Yeah.
Um, But if you can kind of reorient your employees' thinking from what you're doing is healing pain and moving it over to your problem solving, it can change things up, right? It's almost like the mindset of what is the atmosphere you as an employer are creating for your employees to keep them sane.
And one of the like there's a lot. There's a science to building that level of culture, and there's
Of
no
course.
one thing, no one pizza party, ping pong table, or anything is going to suddenly build culture. It takes a while, but there's some common themes that, especially as a service provider, you can embody that will start to reduce the risk of this type of employee acting in this way. And yeah, like Chris is saying here, like a lot of your most passionate employees who then feel unheard can become disgruntled. So I think like some really common things, clearly set open expectations is such a big one. And it's funny because you'll hear the aggregate employee, if you go on Reddit, call that micromanaging because they've never had it done properly. It's not micromanaging. If I clearly know what good looks like and
Yep.
I am able to self assess that I'm arriving at that goal without having to ask or receive the feedback from you, then every day, no matter how bad it is, I can end the day with the satisfaction of I did a good job today. That's a really piece of powerful brain kung fu. And then if you add in what you were saying, which is funny, we see this now in modern dog training as well, you reward good behavior. So like how many employers forget to just simply let an employee know that, hey, you're meeting expectations. We tend to only tell them when they're exceptional or when they need to improve. Like how many times do you just let somebody know, like, I hired you to do a task and you did the task, thank you for doing the task. That validation is important because now, just like giving a dog a treat for sitting when it's supposed to or not piddling, on the floor, you start to associate that behavior is what we want more of. And if you do
Yes.
that consistently across an entire organization, everybody at that organization starts noticing that's behavior we want more of.
And you know
And
what
that
it does,
means,
Dean? Go ahead.
here's the magical part to all of this. When you bring somebody into the organization
Behind the
that is
magic.
toxic from the start, so that rare person like this guy that probably wasn't a good person to start with, everybody in the organization almost immediately will viscerally have a reaction that this person is not performing the same behaviors with the same level of genuine passion that everyone else is. Something is wrong here. Hey, boss, I want to talk to you. Yeah, Tim over here is good at resetting passwords. I don't know what it is, but just there's little things that the team is noticing that tell us that something's off here. You're more likely to have your organization identify that there is a potential risk here. And in this case, had that happened, I'm not saying this would have been prevented, but at least Disney would have had an opportunity to potentially identify. And for all we know, that did happen.
Right.
But they would have
We
had
don't know the
an
details.
opportunity to identify this employee, maybe recognize they weren't fit for the role they were in. Maybe they found a better role for them in the organization, or unfortunately, maybe they had to exit them. But if you're not doing any of that, you lose out on the weight of everybody that works for you being
Yeah.
able to give you that feedback and help align that person with that covenant.
One of the challenges this kind of creates in my mind here, um, and it's hard because we can go and I want to wrap up soon because I know you have a meeting coming up here. But I know that one of the challenges that we can run into as organizations is what we're doing to keep our employees motivated, not just from a financial perspective. I mean, obviously, money doesn't buy happiness, but it helps, right? But at the same time, what are you doing to create kind of that intrinsic sense of worth for your clients or your employees, so that they want to do the work that's set out before them because they feel a sense of it's like unlocking an achievement on Xbox, right? It's like what are you doing that honestly doesn't stand out as something amazing. It's not like you got the platinum trophy here. It's just a simple bronze reward. But it's just a simple way to create that sense of worth for your client, for your employees, to make them feel valued, and it's going to make them want to come back and do what they're doing.
You ever play a video game? The Xbox Achievement is actually a great example. You ever play a video game where somewhere relatively early on in the game, you get a hold of a relatively rare or valuable consumable item that then you hang on to in case you'll need it, and then you never use it, even though it would have helped you, and you end the game still having multiple of that item? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it's
Common gaming thing.
like a master ball in Pokemon. I mean, you don't get that early, but still, only use it
And
once.
a big part of psychologically why we do that, besides resource hoarding and risk avoidance, is that quite simply the actual best use of that item is never properly communicated. You're never really explicitly made to understand this is the exact context and when that is the time to use it, and don't worry, you'll find more. The games don't tell you that. And that's because of gaming psychology. But in the real world, if you think about that, like if you're constantly relating back everything an employee does to the end goal of your organization, if you're relating it back to what we're doing and why, your core values, and you're reinforcing that context, you're teaching them just a little bit about the business and the why. Most employees, most of your A and B players, which make up the majority of your team, they are going to pick up on that. And that context is going to help them. It's going to help them make slightly better decisions. And all of that is mentally rewarding. It rewards their brains because they know in that moment, I did the right thing in support of this goal, which is what we're trying to do. And I know that even if my boss comes to me and says, hey, next time, don't make that decision, my boss is going to follow that up with, but I see why you did it. And I really appreciate that you thought that way.
Yeah.
That's a cultural element. It takes time to build that, but that type of organization is highly unlikely to have the kind of risk that we saw in this scenario. It's still possible, right? But at that point, you're getting somebody who's almost sociopathic in their ability to mask that behavior. And I don't really think that the culture and psychology really applies there anymore. Then you really have to rely on security controls and process and hope that you never hire, Ted Bundy at your MSP. But you can get real far just by being honest and open about what they're doing, why, what the expectations are, and having clear and open communication about that. Most humans like that. Like that's what we want. And we're pretty happy with that. And in fact, take it a step further to say most people, if that's what you're doing, they don't want to leave, even when they're upset, because that's comfortable. It's like a big warm chair and they just want to stay in it because it's comfortable and it's safe. So there's really a lot to gain from that.
You could have people offer jobs where they'd make more money, but they don't want to leave because of the company culture you've created. I didn't think this was going to be a conversation that shifted to company culture, but in reality, don't most. A lot of times you get into that conversation because honestly, if you create an environment for your employees where they don't want to leave, I mean, I'd say you're building a successful business because you've created teamwork.
Well, I'm not like that was what I had to do. I'm not a John Hammond level service manager when I was running an MSP. Like we need a firewall. I know that. I don't know anything about what to do. So like I had to rely on other people to have that knowledge. So my only tool set was keeping those people engaged and happy and really like wanting to do right. So that's my side of it. And I think if you can do both sides of it, if you have all the controls in place, the right processes, the right technology, and then you also back that up with people that want to be there, that are trying to do right, there's never zero risk, but boy, if you minimize the likelihood of this sort of situation really ever biting you in any significant way.
Yep. Dude, it's perfect. All right. We got 3 minutes. What is the key takeaway for you, Dean, from this conversation?
You can anonymously mail somebody a 5-pound box of live bees. So if you're just no, don't do that. Never mind.
Hey, that is a disgruntled employee move right there.
I think the biggest takeaway here is, first of all, you need to have an auditing process.
Not first of all.
Okay, you need to have an auditing process for your employee offboarding.
Yes.
No matter what, you just have to. And the person doing the auditing, I think it's best if they're not the person executing the offboarding process. So you have a different brain looking at it and saying, what about this? What about that? if this company had been doing that, almost certainly this employee would not have had the access they had. They might have still been able to do a lot of terrible things, but they might not have been able to do them quite as easily or the way it manifested here.
They probably could have still, stalked people at their homes. You're not
Oh
going to
yeah.
stop that with admin right revokes, but at least they wouldn't be changing menus and putting peanut allergy things. Yeah, I think my takeaway, which wasn't expected, but build a company culture where I think you hit the nail on the head. If you build a company culture where people feel appreciated and they do the work, like they feel appreciated for the work that they're doing, when somebody comes into that culture that doesn't fit, that isn't living that way, people will encourage that person, I hope, to live that way and work that way. But if they don't, it'll become fairly quickly understood that no, this person's not a good fit. Um, and I just think there's something really interesting there, that you've created a culture where the employees want to work, they want to be productive, they want to work as a team. And when you have someone come in who doesn't function that way, it becomes
And
extremely
and when
obvious.
they do leave you, because people will leave you. When they
Of
do
course.
leave you, even if you fire them, when they do leave you, there's going to be that sense in the back of their head that, like, no, that company was my friend. Like,
Yeah.
I'm mad, and maybe I'll go post an honest review on Glassdoor that isn't kind, but I'm not going to do that next step because I don't want to hurt all those people I worked with. I don't want to hurt all those clients. There's that disassociation we talked about at the very beginning of this call from your internal emotions with the outcome. There's something in between, and that disassociation allows someone a moment of clarity to not take that extra step after they run up and knock on the door and keep, accelerating that prank until it becomes damaging.
Dude, that's it. Hey, Dean, thanks so much for jumping on here last minute, man. It was a exhilarating and insightful conversation. I hope everybody has some good hot takeaways for this weekend as they go in. And yeah, Dean, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you.
Hey, where can people find you next if they want to talk to you about risk in general?
Um, I don't know. I don't know if I should say.
You'll be out and about in the
I'll be out and
industry.
about. You'll find me. I'll find you before you find me. Let me put
All
it
right.
that way.
I like it.
What I will say is, when it comes to insurance, go to fifthwallsolutions.com. When it comes to whatever it is that Dean does, go to helped.com. Is that
100%,
the website?
100% US based tier 1 support and call answering. Go
Is
to
it
gethelp.com.
helped.com? Get
Get
helped.
helped. Help.com is actually a site for people who are struggling, like the gentleman in
Wow.
this story. So
Well, look
go
at that.
there
If
if
you
you are struggling.
accidentally go there, you might get some help too.
Mhm.
So there we go. All right. Have a good weekend, everybody.